Hi everybody, this is Laura, City Scrapper. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made using the Shimmerz July color kits. And I'm happy to say that this layout is the first one that I made as a member of the Shimmerz design team. The July papers have a beautiful combination of peaches and greens. The flowers were fussy cut from one of the pattern papers, and the flowers in this kit were absolutely beautiful. You could see I have a number of them off to the left. And then I used one of the pattern papers that had a number of different shades of orange and peach on it, and I cut that into 1/4 inch strips. Now I'm using Distress Oxide in 2 different colors to ink the edges of all of these strips and flowers. I used saltwater taffy and carved pumpkin. In addition to the 1/4 inch strips that I cut out, I used 2 different punches, a large scallop from EK Success and a smaller scallop punch from Fiskars. The scalloped strips are going to be used as borders. Usually when I'm inking something that I fussy cut, I ink the whole piece the same color. But for these pieces, I individually inked the lighter flowers, saltwater taffy, and the darker flowers, carved pumpkin. And then I also used some forest moss Distress Oxide, and I inked the edges of the green leaves. I'm going to attach these strips of paper to this piece of white cardstock. I used a T-square and I drew some guidelines. Those help me to make sure that I'm putting those strips on the paper straight. I put the larger scallop strip on the outside, and then I layer the smaller scallop on top of the larger one. And then I'm going to continue with the 1/4 inch strips. The 1/4 inch strips are 3 different shades of peach. I'm not going to put 2 strips that are the same color next to each other. I'm also, though, not going to create a pattern. I'm just going to try to put them down somewhat randomly. It doesn't look too bad on this layout. Sometimes I find that when I use pencil to draw lines and then I roll the ATG adhesive over it, it could create a little bit of a messy situation because the pencil gets smeared by the adhesive. I always think that next time I'm going to use a pen, but then I never remember. Now that I have all of the strips attached down, I cut away the excess cardstock. But then I realized that the scallops look different on the 2 sides. On one side, there's a full scallop on the top, and on the other side, there's only a half scallop, and I knew that that would bother me, so I decided I'd better fix it right now before I'm peeling everything up at the very end. What I did to fix that was I cut the half scallop off of the top of the strip on the right, and then I repositioned the strips that are layered on top of it so that that would be the first part of the strip. And then I took the piece that I cut off and I put it at the end. Then I put all of the strips of paper back again, and now the 2 large scallop strips match each other. I cut some very, very thin strips of a floral pattern paper that was in the kit, and then I attach that down to either side of this larger strip of paper strips. I thought that adding the pattern would add a little bit more interest to this area. I popped up my photo on some foam. You can see I pieced together a bunch of scraps, and I'm placing my photo in the center of the strips of paper. Now I'm adding some photo corners. I punched these out of one of the pattern papers. I inked the edges with some carved pumpkin, and then I put them in place using ATG adhesive. Now, one of the parts that I love, adding the embellishments. I'm adding some of those fussy cut flowers that I inked the edges of earlier. I have some in the upper left-hand corner of the photo, some in the lower right-hand corner, and I'm going to be adding more flowers to my layout. I'm just going to be creating a mixed media background, and after I do that, I'll add the flowers to the background. I always like adding combinations of different sizes of flowers, so I have the larger flowers, and then there were some thinner ones that had stems attached to them. So now I'm embellishing with those smaller flowers. I like the way they reach out past the larger ones. I think it makes a nice little floral arrangement on the layout. There were quite a few pattern papers that had images of flowers on them, so I tried to take advantage of that, and I fussy cut out a number of medium-sized flowers, and now I'm adding some of those flowers into both of the clusters. As I go along, I ink the edges with the Distress Oxide. So now I'm going to start my mixed media background. First, I indicate where the large strip is going to go so that I don't spend too much time adding mixed media in an area that's going to get covered up. I'm using the Felicity Jane stencil that was included in the kit, and I'm adding some modeling paste through the stencil. The paper that I'm using is a 120-pound piece of white smooth cardstock. I've coated it with some white gesso. I started off by putting some modeling paste in the two areas where I know the flowers that I put on the large strip are going to overlap the background. And then I added some modeling paste in a few other areas. I'm trying not to be too symmetrical with my addition of modeling paste and later on my addition of flowers. I want it to look a little bit random, so I'm kind of trying something new. My brain usually goes to symmetrical layouts, and I want to switch that up for some layouts, so that's what I'm trying to do here. To create a mixed media background, I'm going to be using 3 different Shimmerz paints. I'm using an Inklings in Pistachio right now. The Inklings come dry and you spray water in there to activate the color. I love the Inklings because they have a really cool sheen to them. It's just not something that I've seen in other paints, so I really like working with those. In a little while, I'm also going to be using Vibes, and the color is Green Tide Monster. And I'll add a few accents with another Vibes called Tangerine Dream, and these are all included in the color kit. What's nice about having a cluster that is movable is I can keep placing it on top of the mixed media background and see if I like the way everything is coming together. It's also very helpful for figuring out how large to make the areas of color. Sometimes if I add a cluster on top of a mixed media background, I find that I didn't make the color area large enough, and then I have to go back and add more paint. What I'm doing now is adding a second layer of the Inklings, and I am not adding the second coat in all of the areas. That helps to create some variation. I also add some splatters by adding a little bit more water and a small brush, and then I tap the handle of the brush, and that creates a few little splatters. I received an item in the mail that was inside of a little pocket of bubble wrap, so that's what I use to spread the Inklings around the page. It just creates a little bit of extra texture when using the bubble wrap. I didn't compare bubble wraps, but I think that the bubbles on this wrap are a little bit smaller than on your average bubble wrap, which creates a slightly smaller scale texture on the paint. Now I'm going in with a darker color of green. This is the Vibes Green Tide Monster. I want to add some darker areas, but I don't want to cover up all of the pistachio color. After I add some of the dark green color by using the bubble wrap, I add quite a few splatters to each of those areas. Then to pick up a little bit of the darker green color, I roll my paper towel over the top of the layout. Now I'm adding a little bit more of the pistachio, and then I wanted to add a little hint of the peach color to the background too. That will help to tie the areas of pattern paper together with the background. So now I'm just adding some splatters of the Tangerine Dream to each of the areas that I have put the green paint on. Right away, just that small addition of the peach color makes the background, I think, look so much more vibrant and so much more interesting. And that's something that's really nice about these paints. They're already coordinated, so these combinations of colors are particularly beautiful, and I don't have to think too much about it. All the hard work of coordinating colors is done for you. I like the combination and the contrast between the pistachio and the green Tide Monster. So I am continuing to add a few splatters of the darker green color to each of the areas of color. When the splatters are first applied, they look a little bit darker and then they lighten up as they dry. Every layout is different, but in general, I like the color in my backgrounds to be somewhat subtle because I want my photo to be the most important thing on the page, and I don't want the mixed media to overpower the embellishments and all the other elements. While I want the color to be interesting, I don't want it to be too dark. Now, one of my favorite touches is adding some watered down white acrylic paint to the background. I'm usually a little heavy-handed with the white splatters. There's just something about them. I love them so much, and I always love the contrast between the clusters of color and the white splatters. I put the background aside to dry, and now I'm adding some ATG to the back of my big photo cluster, and I'm attaching that in the center of the layout. Here I'm using my ruler just to double check that it's centered, and I needed to make a little bit of an adjustment to get it right in the center of the page. Once I have it where I want it, I press it down, and now I'm going to add some more of those fussy cut flowers to each of the areas where I have the mixed media in the background. I love adding embellishments on top of a mixed media background. Sometimes the mixed media background looks a little odd without having anything layered on top, but then as soon as, in this case, the flowers are put on top, I think it looks so much more purposeful with the hints of color all around the embellishments. After I'm satisfied with the placement of each of the flowers, I add some adhesive to the back and put them in place. As I mentioned before, I like to have clusters that have a variety of different sized flowers. Sometimes the clusters are a little bit too small to have too many different flowers in each one. I do like to have some different size clusters. I don't want them to all be the same size, especially in this layout where I have a lot of little clusters scattered throughout the page. Even for the smallest clusters, if I could add a small flower or another small branch or leaf, that variety to me really makes a big difference. So I have to balance adding variety with making the clusters too large. I love to add leaves and branches to floral clusters. I usually do this with die cuts. In this case, I'm using a Pinkfresh Studio die and some 80-pound cardstock. I use some of the Vibes Green Tide Monster, and I paint all of the leaves dark green. I don't include all of the footage, but I add a couple of coats of the Tide Monster, and that helps to create some variation. Some of the leaves have a little bit more paint than others, and I never like to have flat color. I always like to make it a little bit more interesting for the eye by varying it in some way. To add a little bit more variation and also some sheen, I add some of the Inklings pistachio. I don't coat the entire leaf with the pistachio. I just add it on a couple of leaves on each of the branches. And then off camera, I took a piece of cardstock and I painted the edges again with that Vibes green color. I wanted the photo to be prominent on the page, of course, so I thought that I would use the most prominent color to mat the photo. I was happy with the addition of this mat because not only did it give emphasis to the photo, but it also brought some green into that area that is mostly peach. And I think that that helps to tie the greens together with the peaches on the layout. Now the paint on the die cut leaves is dry and I am adding it to the layout. You can see that I'm not using those whole large branches. They're a little bit too big for this layout. I'm cutting them into smaller pieces, and I'm trying to vary the size of the pieces, again, to add more variation to each of the clusters. Once I cut off the top portion of the die cut, the rest of the die looks like the top was cut off, so then I'll cut into it a little bit so that it looks a little bit more natural and not like I just clipped part of it off. It takes a bit of time to die cut and then also to paint each of these die cut pieces, so I don't want to waste any of them. I try to use as many of the leaves from each branch as possible. This photo was taken quite a few years ago when my older daughter was away at college. She went to college in Rochester, New York, which was 5 hours away, and I never liked having her that far away, so I'm glad that she's closer to home now. I used some gel glue to attach all of those branches in place, and now I'm going to work on my title. I had some thickers, but they had a very light but noticeable blue pattern on them. So first I coated each of the letters with some white gesso. When the gesso was dry, I sprayed on some Shimmerz Color Splash in whites of their eyes. I should have let those letters dry a little bit longer because I smudged the paint in a couple of areas, but I was able to fix it up for the most part. I like the way the color splash has a little bit of a sheen to it, and I thought that that looked nice on the letters of the title. I liked these letters. I thought this was a nice size and a nice style of font for this layout. This is the name of the restaurant that we were at. It was called Taichi. I didn't want to just call the layout Taichi though, so I got some Pinkfresh puffy letters. These are very tiny letters, and I'm going to call it Lunch at Taichi. I'm not sure actually if it would be considered a restaurant. It was a little too nice to be called a fast food place, but it was the style of one where you got your food up front and paid for it and then just sat down at any table. My daughter Danielle really wanted us to go there because they had sushi burritos, something I had never tried before, and I'm glad that I did. They were pretty good. From way back when, I had a couple of peach-colored pearls, so I put one on each of the photo corners. And then looking through my stash of pearls, I realized I had some super tiny pearls. I didn't even realize I had pearls this small. I used my scissors to help me position one pearl on each of the large scallops. That is the last touch I add to the layout. This layout is complete, and here are some close-ups. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'm so excited to be part of the Shimmerz design team. In the description box, you'll find a link to the Shimmerz Paints website if you would like to check out all of their awesome products. If you mention my name in the comments when you place an order, you'll receive a free product. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I hope to see you all again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.